My name is Alexis, and this is my piece tentatively titled Here and There. It's a coming-of-age story with fantasy themes where I've had a lot of fun playing around with the addition of epistolary scenes and a more poetic form of prose. It follows two main characters throughout the story, and I've had a lot of fun deepening them as the semester progressed, so I can't wait for you to get a little taste of meeting them too. These are my opening scenes, so there's no background knowledge needed. Enjoy! Colors, patterns, textures swirled, sneered, slapped at dizzying speeds, without shapes, without separation. The world around her was one writhing, spinning, convulsing mass of bad. The colors scratched, blinded, screamed, but no single hue could be picked out in the fast, slow, wrong pulsing that consumed, that shunned, that taunted. The mass fog body of colors picked and plucked and pushed her. She was down on the floor, smashed, trampled, choked underfoot. The fog mass body of colors fawned and caressed and kissed her. She was loved and cherished. A pretty favorite darling pet, spinning with them, spinning for them, spinning opposite of them, falling for them, falling because of them, falling into them, drunk and dizzy, sobbing and laughing, clinging and running, round and round and round, and nothing to grab, nothing to reach, nothing to hold, no hope, no air, no space. Grapes without grapes, liquid with fire, drinking without stomach, vile, messy, burning. The world was sourer, brighter, louder than her eyes could process, and she lived in the middle of it all. Demira washed her face, careful not to scrub hard as she had the first week of being back home, as so not to aggravate her already tender skin. It was weird to have mirrors again, to face herself and what she looked like now that she was back. It wasn't as if it had changed much. She hadn't even been gone a full year, at least for her. But she still didn't want to look. If she had to confront herself now, she knew it would look wrong for reasons she couldn't explain. Something about her eyes was different, or maybe it was the way her hair was thinner now than it had been before. There was just something off whenever she tried to look at herself. She didn't want to be seen, even if it was just by herself. But if she got rid of the mirrors, her parents would worry, and she didn't want them to do that. Besides, what was stranger than the mirror was the people around her now. It was the same. Her town never changed much, after all, but it didn't look the same. It was the little things that stuck in her mind and left her scrubbing herself raw to try and remove the otherness she felt hanging on her shoulders. Her parents, for instance, seemed nearly impossible to face. Her week had been years for them, years that peppered her father's black hair with gray and left her mother's hair thinning, years that saw her childhood friends in new families and children made into adults. It was the fact that the next-door neighbor's house was blue instead of gray now, a paint job that caught her eye nearly every time she left or entered the house because it was just a bit off. The flower garden they'd planted was still there after all. A small color change shouldn't have meant so much, but the more she passed it, the more she started to take notice of all the slightly wrong things about it, like the fact that their walkway now had children's handprints painted on it, and there was a play garden with metal flowers where a bird bath had been. Had they put the bird bath in the backyard, or would the birds have to find other places now? The question stuck in her head some nights, nagging at her like a neglected project, though she had no idea what to do about it. Was she supposed to just walk up to their door and ask if they understood the consequences of their decor changes? She tried not to think about the incorrect neighborhood or the dress she put on, loose and light and completely different from the style the people she passed wore. It made her stick out like a sore thumb, and she hated having such a visible thing to alienate her the way her mind and the rumors already were. But her old clothes left her hyper-aware of the fact she was an imposter in every step she took, so she just had to hope the others would get used to her odd fashion sense. Her new clothes were familiar, which was odd to say, but it felt true. The clothes she'd worn before she should have felt right in, like her father without glasses, but instead she was left with the odd sort of sinking feeling in her gut that told her, as much as she longed for it to be untrue, that the town had not been the only one to change. It made her wonder, as she kicked a rock along with her now, how much of the perceived changes she made up. Maybe the sunflowers in front of that house had always been that short, and her memory of them towering over the windows had just been a childhood distortion. She was too uncomfortable with the idea to ask someone else. Demira took a breath as she left her neighborhood and headed through the busy area of town, feeling her skin itch and her hands shake as she headed confidently through downtown and out towards the lake. Downtown was mostly the same as she remembered, but there were too many of those slight changes, making her feel like a stranger in her hometown to be comfortable. The bakery, for example, had moved to a bigger building and a fabric store popped up in its place. And even though she could still easily find her way to the recreation center that played music every Saturday night, the landmarks along the journey were different. New statues or storefronts, moves and complete closures of businesses. Street names stayed the same, but she had never really traveled by street name. Why would she need to when buildings were stationary? Or so she'd thought. Still, the roads were familiar, and there was enough of the same that she had no issue getting through the streets. Well, no navigational one. She walked fast and avoided people, glad even the busiest areas of her town didn't suffocate her with the presence of others, and people along her normal route knew not to stop her now. The first week she'd been cornered by 3 old friends who worked in the area now, and ended the little reunion by going into shakes so bad she'd nearly vomited before her parents were brought to bring her home. Since then, the occasional questioning by strangers or old friends had been met with guarded hostility to avoid a similar encounter. It wasn't a great way to go about it, but it was better to be a loner for a while than to be the weird girl who always needed her parents to rescue her. She hadn't needed that before she left, and she didn't want to bother them with it now. Besides, she had nothing in common with her old friends now, and didn't have the energy to rekindle those relationships or make new ones. The lake was the lake, though. Nature hadn't suddenly stopped or opened new stores or reorganized the plants she'd once instinctively been able to navigate. Here was the home she remembered, flowers blooming and weeds taking over, dependent on the season, not on human whims. So they would always be back, always be growing. Even if it wasn't a perfect replica, she'd never memorized the patterns of wildflowers in the grass the way she had memorized hangout spots different groups of friends gravitated to. It was easier to accept differences like this. The larger picture was still the same as her childhood, and as she looked up at a bird she'd never seen before, with peace instead of the clawing rawness town gave her, she had a bit of hope that maybe she could accept changes. Soon it would all be normal after all. She would eventually get used to her hometown again and the little changes, and as soon as she could just get a handle on the changes she had gone through, she'd get a job and make a new normal for herself, and that would be enough. That had to be enough. How to avoid getting kidnapped by the good folk under the hill. How to get kidnapped by the good folk under the hill and get a fairy wife. Fairies are most powerful on Fridays, so I will get better results if I try on Friday. Schedule chores to be done by Friday. What does it even mean to be most powerful? Do not sing by the lake. Sing by the lake. Does it matter how good I sing? I have to ask Astrid if my singing is good. I have to ask Astrid's kids if my singing is good. Kids are more truthful. Do fairies like the same kind of music as us? I have to learn more dancing tunes instead of lullabies. Do not wander the hills alone if you are in your youth. Wander alone on the hills if you are in your youth, which I am according to my parents if I want to do something, but I'm not in the cases of marriages being brought up. Aren't all humans youthful to fairies? Maybe it's in how young I look. Still no wrinkles since I'm 20, so I should be good. The girl who came back from the fairy realm is/was my age, so I'm probably fine. They enjoy music and will often steal musicians. Do not practice alone and avoid their hearing. Practice alone. Is my violin good enough? Practice more on the hills? Or should I stay away from the hills so they don't think I'm a bad musician and avoid me? They're attracted to pretty baubles. Wearing too many will catch their eye. Save up to buy more jewelry. Borrow Astrid's? Do shiny stones work? Note to self. Try to meet the girl who came back from the fairy realm. Willa stretched as she finished updating her list with the thoughts she'd had last night and got up to finish getting dressed for the day. She'd spent days in the library compiling it in a way that wouldn't attract attention, so the original version could have read as safety guidelines to anyone who cared to peep. She'd thought about rewriting it completely now that she was home, but it had taken so long to make and write in the neatest script that she ended up just scribbling on her additional notes next to it, crossing out things that went against her actual plans. "Darling, are you headed for the library again today?" Her mother knocked on the door. "No, why?" "I know today is your day off, and you've been going there a lot, so I just thought you might go today too." "No, but why did you want to know?" "I thought maybe you'd gotten a job there." "You thought I got a second secret job," Willa sighed as she opened the door and walked past her mother to put on her shoes. "Or maybe you were meeting someone there. Secret date, maybe. I think David works there, right? He's single." "That's not funny, Mom. I was doing research." Oh, tutoring. It was clear she was disappointed by the idea of her daughter simply going to the library to make lesson plans instead of whatever romance career boost she'd been assuming. "I'm going for a walk." It was better to drop the subject while she was ahead. She doubted her mother would like the explanation of, "I was researching fairies so I can get kidnapped by one, actually, preferably a really cute girl one, much better." "With Astrid?" "Astrid's busy with her kids. She doesn't have time to go on walks with me anymore." Willa tightened her laces a little too violently. "Are you still upset with her for getting married?" "I'm not upset with her." "You sure act like it whenever I bring her up." "We hang out every Saturday." "You used to hang out every day." "And now she's busier with her kids, and I have more people I'm tutoring." Willa chose not to point out the fact that her mother had always complained about the amount of time Willa and Astrid spent glued to each other's hips. There was no reason to start an argument she'd lose by sheer virtue of her opponent being her mom. "I'll be back in time to help with dinner." "Stay safe." Giving her mom a kiss goodbye, she headed off to the hills for her first try and wandering. If this didn't work within the hour, she'd just use them to take the long way to the lake for some singing. She honestly wasn't sure how effective all this was going to be. People didn't usually purposely get kidnapped by the Fae, so it wasn't like there was a guide. Or at least she hadn't been able to find it. But even if it took weeks of trying, she was going to get noticed and get out of here.